from Maryland is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the distinguished chairman of the Judiciary Committee for yielding, and I thank him for his efforts. I want to thank his staff as well, who've been extraordinary. Heather in particular has had her virtues regaled by Dr. Abachar, my staff, and I thank her. I want to thank Jim Sensenbrenner. I want to thank Cheryl as well, who has been an extraordinary help on the Americans with Disabilities Act and with this Restoration Act. She has been a giant in her leadership. And I want to thank Jim Sensenbrenner, with whom I've worked now for many years on this issue. And he has been, of course, a giant as chairman of the Judiciary Committee in years past and one of the senior members of this House, extraordinarily helpful and a partner in this effort. I also want to thank Buck McKeon, the ranking member. At the time we testified, he said, you know, we want to see this passed, but we want to work together and make sure we can all be for it. And I said I assured him that we would do that. And I was pleased today that he said, in fact, we had done that. And I think the result that we will see in the vote will show that clearly. And I thank him for his work and effort and good faith in working towards a bill that we could all support. And lastly, I want to, not lastly, I may thank other people, but George Miller, my friend, the chairman of the Education and Labor Committee, whose committee had primary jurisdiction over this bill, for his efforts in assuring that this bill moves forward. Madam Speaker, I would like to submit for the record a list of people, particularly in the disabilities community and also in the business community, who spent countless hours, days, weeks, and yes, even months trying to come to an agreement on a bill that both the business community and the disability community would feel comfortable with. We have accomplished that, but it was the work of these people as well who did that. And I would submit this at this time in the record to thank them for their efforts and their success, which they are so responsible for today. Without objection. Thank you.
You yield back the balance of your time?
No, without objection.
Without objection. The gentleman.
Madam Speaker, 18 years ago next month, the first President Bush signed into law one of the most consequential pieces of civil rights legislation in recent memory, in over a quarter of a century, in fact. In the ceremony on the South Lawn of the White House, President Bush said this: "With today's signing of the landmark Americans with Disabilities Act, every man, woman, and child with a disability can now pass through once closed doors into a bright new era of equality, independence, and freedom." And in large measure, President Bush was right. Those doors have, in fact, come open. Tens of millions of Americans with disabilities now enjoy rights the rest of us have long taken for granted. The right to use the same streets, theaters, restrooms, or offices. The right to prove themselves in the workplace, to succeed on their talent and drive alone. We all understand why there are cuts in the sidewalk of every street corner, kneeling buses on our city streets, elevators on the metro, ramps at movie theaters, and accessible restrooms and handicapped parking almost everywhere. By now, they've become part of our lives' fabric. And we wouldn't have it, I think, any other way. Because each one of us, or each one of those, is the sign of a pledge, the promise of an America that excludes none of its people from our shared life and opportunities. That was the promise of the ADA. That was the promise of the ADA that President George Bush signed on July 26, 1990. But looking back 18 years, the hard truth is that we were in some ways perhaps too optimistic. The door President Bush spoke of is still not entirely open. And every year, millions of us are caught on the wrong side. In interpreting the law over these 18 years, the courts have consistently chipped away at Congress's very clear intent. And I know what the intent was because I was there, as so many of you were. I know that many of my colleagues were as well, and I know that they share my disappointment in a series of narrow rulings that have had the effect of excluding millions of Americans from the law's protection, for no good reason. We said we wanted broad coverage for people with disabilities and people regarded as disabled. But the courts narrowed that coverage with a strict and demanding standard, a severely restrictive measure that virtually excluded entire classes of people, even though we had specifically mentioned their impairments as objects of the law's protections. Civil rights acts have historically been urged to be interpreted liberally to accomplish their objective of protecting the rights of individuals. Unfortunately, in this instance, the courts did not follow that premise. We never expected that people with disabilities who work to mitigate their conditions would have their efforts held against them. Imagine somebody with epilepsy who takes medication to preclude seizures would be told that we're not going to hire you because you have epilepsy, but then be told by the court that that was not discrimination because prescription drugs mitigated the ability or the disability that you had. No one on this floor would have thought in their wildest assertions that that would be an interpretation. The courts did exactly that, however, throwing their cases out on the grounds that they were no longer disabled enough to suffer discrimination. The discrimination, of course, was determining that somebody had epilepsy and notwithstanding their ability or their ability to perform the job in question, that they would not be hired. That is the essence of discrimination. That is what we sought to preclude. And I want to again congratulate the business community and the disabilities community for coming together on legislation that will right that misinterpretation. Because none of what has been held was our intent. We're here today because a truly wide coalition of the disability community ready to claim their equal share, members of both parties who are tired of seeing constituents shut out, and business groups eager to unlock new pools of talent. An alliance as broad as the one that joined forces to pass the original ADA has come together to help the courts get this right. I know some of them are watching, and I want to thank them through my colleagues and through the Speaker for their efforts. With the ADA Amendments Act, we make it clear today that a cramped reading of disability rights will be replaced with a definition that is broad and fair. Fair to the disability community and fair to the business community. That those who manage to mitigate their disabilities are still subject to discrimination and still entitled to redress, and that those regarded as having disability are equally at risk and deserve to be equally protected. I'm proud, Madam Speaker, to have worked for so long with my colleague Jim Sensenbrenner, as I said earlier. He's been a leader in advancing this legislation, and we've joined together to submit for the record a legal analysis of the bill that we've worked so hard to bring to fruition. And I want to thank my good friend, former Congressman Tony Coelho, for originally enlisting me in this effort. Very frankly, Tony is one of my very close friends. And when he left the Congress, the ADA had not yet been accomplished. But it was his leadership that got it to the point where, in fact, we could proceed. And he gave me the responsibility of ensuring its passage. And working with George Miller and John Conyers and Jim Oberstar and so many others, we were able to accomplish that objective. But Tony Coelho was our leader on this effort. And very frankly, Madam Speaker, our former whip remains our leader today. Finally, it is my honor to dedicate the bill to Justin Dart, the pioneering disability advocate and an inspiration behind the ADA, as well as to his wife, Yoshiko Dart. Madam Speaker, few kinds of discrimination in all of our history have been more widespread than the exclusion of those with disabilities. But it was America that passed a pioneering law to help end that exclusion. We were the first in the world to do so. We were the world's model on this central challenge to human rights. 18 years later, we cannot afford to fall behind. Let us pass this bill and bring us one step closer to the days when the fruits of life in America are at last available to all. and I yield to my friend. I yield to the chairman.
I thank the gentleman for